Story 1. Probably the Paria diving incident, where 5 divers were sucked into an underground oil pipeline while working on repairs. Story 2. A local story that haunts me is the murder of a former coworker, Sean Dugas. He had a Magic, the Gathering card collection worth 6 figures, including a Black Lotus that was incredibly rare at the time. He befriended 2 brothers who eventually chased him around his house and bludgeoned him to death with a hammer before stuffing his body into a plastic bin and filling it with concrete. It is so disturbing to me because Sean was such a calm, kind person who was once reprimanded for wearing baggy jeans to interviews. He was a gifted reporter and helped start a homeless encampment that served hundreds for years after his death. He was a unique and caring individual, and the thought of the terror he endured in his final moments frightens me more than any horror movie I have ever seen. Story 3. Luis Garavito is by far the worst serial killer and pedophile I have ever heard of. He was active in Colombia in the 1990s and would lure homeless young boys into the jungle by offering them food, money, or jobs. He made them walk many miles until they were too tired to fight back or escape. Afterwards, he would savagely rape and torture the boys. It is worse than you think. He was convicted of 189 murders, but is believed to have murdered as many as 300 to 400 boys. Mass graves containing the remains of dozens of his victims have been found. Luis's crimes were so prolific and brutal that the police thought it was the work of a cartel, a militant group, or even a satanic cult, since this was during Colombia's civil war, because they could not believe one man could have killed so many or been so brutal. What is even more shocking is Luis was only sentenced to about 20 years in prison because Colombia does not have life imprisonment or the death penalty. Just before he was eligible for parole, he died of cancer. Luis was so prolific that wherever he lived, local reports of child molestation increased substantially. Story 4. The lake that killed an entire village when it suddenly released a large cloud of carbon dioxide. Lake Nyos, a crater lake in Cameroon, caused the deaths of around 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock in 1986 due to a limnic eruption. The lake released a large cloud of carbon dioxide, suffocating nearby villages and livestock. Story 5. One day, I was at my temporary job when an announcement came over the public address system that everyone was to stay in their office, lock the door, and not come out under any circumstances until told to do so. Having no idea what was happening, I locked my office door, jammed a chair under the doorknob, sat on the floor in the knee hole of my desk, and read the book I had brought for lunch. About an hour later, they gave the all clear, and I returned to the task I had been doing before. We later found out that a disgruntled former employee had shown up with a Thompson submachine gun and started shooting people. Story 6. Over the hill from where I was raised in the 1930s, there was a family with a son who had serious mental problems. It had gotten bad enough that they were going to place him in a care facility. The father took the rest of the family to town while the mother stayed with the boy. When the family returned, they found the boy walking around the house with his mother's head on a broomstick. Story 7. Recently, hundreds of women were raped and burned alive during the chaos as a Rwandan-backed rebel group, March 23rd Movement, took control of the Congolese city of Goma. The female inmates were attacked in their wing inside Goma's Munzen's prison. Several thousand men stormed the female wing, raped, decapitated, and then set the female prison on fire with hundreds of women still alive inside. There were babies and children in the prison with their mothers. Some sources report only 9 to 13 survivors of the female prison, while others say there were no survivors of the massacre. The terrors of Rwanda are happening again under our noses, this time in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Many other atrocities are occurring there right now, and this is just one example. To make it worse, almost no one is talking about it, except for an obligatory news article that gets lost among hundreds of other articles about celebrities or other topics. Story 8. This happened in a small rural community not far from the capital city of our state, about under an hour to the city and 15 to 20 minutes from suburbia. Many years ago, a man believed that his wife was cheating on him, so he killed her. Then, he proceeded to kill his 7 children, along with his sister-in-law and her baby, who were visiting. He was due to be executed by hanging, but the death penalty was then banned. He ended up spending only 7 years in jail. Upon release, he moved to another state, changed his name, then married a woman with 7 children and lived his life happily. They had no idea until after he died. Story 9. The DuPont factory and their polytetrafluoroethylene story. One company poisoned the entire planet and got away with it. It sounds fictional, but it absolutely happened, and every living being on Earth still suffers the consequences. Story 10. On September 11th, people trapped on the upper floors decided to jump because the alternative was even worse. Story 11. The murder of James Bulger, and the fact that one of the killers is now married with children, is deeply disturbing. Edit. He was not married. That was my mistake. Venables, who has been in and out of jail for possession of child sexual abuse material since his release, was found to be in a relationship with a woman who had a young child. Thanks to their new identities, it is possible that either or both of them could have gone on to have children of their own. Story 12. The Bhopal Union Carbide disaster. The worst industrial accident in the world. Thousands of people died in agony with absolutely no warning. Story 13. This haunts me because I can see how easily it happened. In 1995, in the United Kingdom, a man was driving a low-loader truck with a mechanical digger on the back. He did not realize that the arm of the digger was not properly secured. As he drove down the twisty roads in Cornwall, the arm would swing out into oncoming traffic. The bucket of the digger ripped the roof from several cars, decapitating the drivers. 5 people died. I do not know if that was 5 separate cars, and I think 2 were injured. The truck driver was completely unaware of the devastation he was leaving in his wake. I think of him sometimes. How awful it must be to know you were, unintentionally, responsible for 5 deaths. He ended up in a psychiatric hospital with post-traumatic stress disorder, and many first responders also needed post-traumatic stress disorder treatment. Horrifying. Story 14. Fatima Quintana. On February 5, 2015, Fatima, a 12-year-old girl, was intercepted by 3 neighbors. They attempted to rape her, and Fatima fought with all her strength to defend herself and reach her home, which was just a few meters away. These 3 men, angered by the girl's resistance, stabbed her more than 90 times, raped her, and tortured her. Even after this, Fatima was still alive in total agony. Upon realizing this, her 3 neighbors smashed her skull by throwing rocks at her. In October 2021, the 3 perpetrators were convicted. Jose Juan Hernandez Tecracino received life imprisonment. Luis Angel Ataide Reyes was sentenced to 73 years and 8 months in prison. Misael Ataide Reyes, a minor at the time of the crime, was initially released due to lack of evidence but was later rearrested and sentenced to 5 years. He is currently free. Unfortunately, Fatima's family has had to travel across Mexico, fleeing retaliation from the families of these individuals, who are also involved in organized crime. Jose Juan and Luis Angel's sentences could still be reduced to parole. Fatima's family continues to fight to ensure that the government upholds its promise of justice and that these 2 offenders are not released. Story 15. Most of the scariest ones have been mentioned already, so I will add one. S21 prison in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge regime. It was in a repurposed high school, existed for 4 years, and had around 20,000 prisoners during that time, of whom only 12 are known to have survived. There are records of over 150 people being released. However, they were likely recaptured and executed. The building is still there and can be visited as a museum. Story 16. The Rwandan genocide involved widespread violence, including the use of machetes and sexual assault. Millions of people were affected by these atrocities. Story 17. The kidnapping, torture, and murder of Junko Furuta. To all those saying I should have put a warning, you are in a thread asking about the scariest thing that is completely true, and it is clearly labeled as a murder. What do you expect? Sunshine and rainbows. Here is your warning. Junko Furuta was a Japanese teenage girl who was kidnapped, then brutally beaten, mercilessly tortured, and repeatedly sexually assaulted for 44 days until she eventually died from the abuse. Story 18. that pedophiles are shockingly common and many go their whole lives without being caught or until they are well into old age. Story 19. The San Isidro mass shooting was one of the first major senseless mass shootings in America. You were just going to McDonald's to get a quick lunch, and then you were dead. Story 20. Very random, but I always thought the Bodom Lake murders were terrifying. The fact that the murderer might have actually shown up at the kids' funerals, and by the time the police realized, they couldn't find him. The overall brutality of it. Being a kid completely isolated in the wilderness with a few of your friends and having a Friday the 13th-like scenario play out. Truly terrifying. There are many scarier stories for sure, but the details of this one always gave me goosebumps when I read about it. Story 21. The untouched power drug traffickers have in Mexico. You could find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time and be forcefully disappeared. God bless your poor soul. Of course, wrong place, wrong time is not exclusive to Mexico, but it is far more common there. You may be recruited, mistaken for someone else, witness something you should not have, or fall victim to someone's cruelty and suffer a terrible fate. It is not just you. Your family may have to turn to groups that search for bodies because the police are not only incompetent but also complicit. Good luck finding a matching bone in the coming years. It is truly terrifying. Story 22. The Aberfan disaster was terrifying for the children, teachers, and parents, but also because the National Coal Board blatantly ignored warnings in the months leading up to the event. It is deeply disturbing that these companies value human life so little in the name of profit. For those who do not know, Aberfan is a mining village in South Wales. On the mountains surrounding the valley, they piled coal spoil products. These tips towered over the villages in the valley. For months before the incident, the firemen of the coal tips warned that the tips were shifting and that they heard noises of movement. In the last few weeks leading up to the disaster, there was heavy rainfall. This, combined with the natural streams of the mountain, started eroding the tips from within. On the day of the disaster, around 9 a.m., just as the children were preparing to go to school assembly, the coal tip avalanched and came crashing down directly onto the school. 116 children died, drowning in coal slurry. There was absolutely no warning to the village. The area lost a generation of children, and it took the National Coal Board decades to admit any fault. Story 23. Toxic humidifier disinfectant case in South Korea affected more than 5,000 victims. When humidifiers were still new, families with children rushed to get this product. Unfortunately, it caused great harm to the victims. 1,814 victims died, and more than 7,000 were injured. Story 24. Went camping in a nice little rustic cabin by a lake. One room, fireplace, bunk beds on one side, door on the opposite side. The first day, everything seemed fine. The next morning, we woke up to over 100 snakes on the concrete floor. They seemed to like the heat from our small cooking fire and came in overnight. There were several species, some venomous but not all. I do not have a snake phobia, but certainly a healthy fear of a painful venomous bite far from hospitals. We had to be very careful and take our time to get out. We left half our stuff we did not need. I was about 8 or 9 years old. Story 25. The Sewol Ferry tragedy. 304 deaths, mostly children. The captain told the passengers to stay put while the ship was sinking. He was one of the first to be rescued. One teacher spent their last moments pushing children out of the ship while fully underwater. They did not have a life jacket and gave all of them to the children. Imagine being so brave that you are trapped on the 3rd floor of a sinking ferry with a room full of children, propelling them out of the window one by one with your feet. You could stop at your last possible breath and swim out yourself, but you choose to save every child you possibly can. A true hero. Story 26. Michigan, 2019. On Christmas Eve, a man named Kevin Bacon met another man on Grindr and went to his house. The man stabbed and ate Kevin. Apparently, it was the first time he tried to do that, but the other victim about 2 months earlier escaped. Story 27. When I was younger, we had a place called the Mushroom Tunnels. It was an old train tunnel that curved around a slight bend and was built of brick, no longer in use. If you stood at one end, you couldn't see the other opening. After it was closed to trains, they built massive doors on each end to grow mushrooms. They used to run ghost tours there, and as little feral kids, my boyfriend and I would hide and jump scare the tours. One night, I didn't go, but he did. Instead of the tour coming, a car arrived, and he kept himself hidden in the tunnel's train cutouts. Small manholes you would step into if a train was passing, because he thought it was the police coming for him as a menace. He watched 3 people pull a body from the trunk and dump it into the manhole next to him. Every second manhole had a pit drop for some reason. He came around after they left, totally shaken, and when I convinced him to go to the police, they dismissed us. We went back again and found a cardigan and a girl's sock at the bottom of the pit that were not there the previous night. We took it back to the police, but again they dismissed us. Absolutely no one believed what he said, but it really messed him up for years as literally nothing ever came from it. Story 28. There were birds, but they did not sing. It is too tragic. I cannot even do a summary. Story 29. Not a story for faint-hearted people. Several years ago, when I was a soldier, my job was to recover and extract citizens of my country from dangerous places or people with valuable information for us. A foreign woman was in contact with our intelligence service, and we had to reach her in exchange for information to capture a terrorist. Then she could obtain French nationality and be placed in a safe location for the rest of her life. We found her dead. She had been discovered somehow, and those animals killed her by filling her vagina with molten metal. Almost a decade later, I still have nightmares about that, about the smell, and I still wonder what kind of inhumanity it takes to do that to someone. On this day, more than any other, I learned that some people look human, but they are not. Story 30. The serial killer Israel Keys would bury kill kits all around the United States, so he could go back at any time and there would not be a trace of him buying suspicious items. He did not have a modus operandi. He killed teens to the elderly, men and women, it did not matter. The story of how he got caught is very wild as well. Story 31. The 2022 Caribbean diving disaster was an absolute nightmare. The employer did nothing, and the men were left to die. They admitted they had no rescue plan, stating they had no legal responsibility to rescue the men. Also, if you value your sleep and sanity, do not read about Unit 731. Story 32. My mother and older brother had to shelter from a mass shooter in the United Kingdom on a rampage. Story 33. I know there is a lot of extreme content in the comments, but to me, the scariest thing is knowing that one day I will not have my mother anymore. Story 34. My friend was on a cruise ship. She had been leading a man on all night at the bar, getting drinks paid for. At the end of the night, she wanted to go her own way. He would not take no for an answer and managed to convince her to let him walk her back to her room. Every inch he took a mile. He asked to use her bathroom as his room was at the other end of the ship. She eventually said yes. He sat down on her bed and would not leave. She convinced him to go eventually. Later that evening, she got stuck in the bathroom, so they called security to her room. Suddenly, the man from earlier was running down the ship, waving her spare room key and apologizing, thinking the security call was because of him. He had stolen it when he sat down and was planning to come back during the night. Story 35. There is a chance, although extremely small, that a gamma ray burst could hit Earth, killing almost everyone and everything. Story 36. I lived in Japan for a couple of years, and I learned quickly that the common knowledge was the best way to kill yourself by train, putting your head on a railing when the train does not have time to brake. There is only one logical explanation for why this was common knowledge, and it still breaks my heart. A personal addition. Trains were almost always on time there. Every time I took the train, if it was even 5 minutes late, it was always due to a suicide. Sometimes there would still be bits of human remains on the tracks. The first few times it happened, it made me want to cry, and I was horrified by how indifferent everyone else seemed. By my 5th or 6th time, I was mostly just thinking, I hope this does not make me too late. The value of a human life was measured entirely by how much it inconvenienced me. I knew most of the people on the platform were quietly thinking the same thing, and that was one of the scariest experiences I have ever had. Story 37. Casey Anthony now has a TikTok to revamp her image, share advice, and support women and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community in memory of her daughter. She was also dating someone with a child. Story 38. Armin May West posted on a fetish website that he was looking for someone to be voluntarily killed and cannibalized. He found someone and carried out the act. Story 39. The story of the Watcher House legitimately kept me up at night. Imagine buying your dream home and then receiving creepy letters from someone saying they have been watching the house for generations. The things they wrote were so specific and eerie, as if they knew what rooms you were in. Story 40. The Romania of Ceausescu. That is what I think of when the right keeps hammering away at their pro-birth policies. That dictator outlawed birth control and abortion in an effort to increase the country's population. The result of that still reverberates. Story 41. When they were kids, my aunt's sister was kidnapped in her early teens during the late 1950s. She was taken from her front yard. Neither her body nor the killer was ever found. Years later, in the mid-1980s, someone confessed to disposing of her body at a little-known state park in South Carolina, which happened to be less than a mile away from our neighborhood. The police and news were all over the road for at least a week, but nothing was ever found. Keep an eye on your children. After the police stopped searching, my little brother and I would search the woods in hopes of finding some clues, but we found nothing. That area had a strange vibe. I saw an unidentified flying object one night. There was a reclusive millionaire who lived nearby. Fighter jets would buzz the treetops about once a month. There was also a plantation house nearby, and old slave quarters could be found in the forest, as well as a cemetery dating back to the 1800s. The canal at the park was built with slave labor. Also rumored was a church near the cemetery, but we never found anything. Story 42. A woman was on a bushwalk one day, tripped over what she thought was a log, and kept on going. When they caught Ted Bundy, he recalled in an interview that one of the strangest things was when he was disposing of a body. A lady in the bush approached, tripped over the body, and just kept going. She did not see him in the distance, so he did not do anything about it. Story 43. The nicest man I know from the nicest family I know shot his mother and then himself during the first weeks of COVID-19 because he believed he would not be able to travel to tend his livestock. Mental illness can happen to anyone. Story 44. When I lived in Alberta, there was a horrific accident involving a road construction crew. They dumped a whole dump truck load of hot asphalt on top of a 16-year-old kid who had just gotten his first job. He did not make it. This happened about 15 years ago. Story 45. Rasputin's life was not scary because of violence, but because he was a cult leader before the concept of cult leaders was defined. Story 46. Absolutely horrifying. Junko Furuta. Warning. You will not be the same person after reading her story. Alternatively, a lesser-known but still tragic story is the case of Kenny Dobbins. Although this is probably not scary, it is deeply disheartening. Story 47. Serbian snipers targeted children during the siege of Sarajevo. They shot 1,600 children. The majority of Serbian people and their ruling politicians deny it, as if it never happened. Story 48. Chernobyl, the fact that a nuclear disaster happened and how it happened, terrifies me. All the people were basically sent in to die to prevent it from becoming more devastating. It is still uninhabitable and will be for a long time. The scale of the event and not knowing the total death count is horrific. Story 49. I got a temporary job working in public health on the program to reduce the number of people smoking. It was my first day, and I was going through reports to get up to speed with the organization. I came across a compact disc read-only memory marked Tobacco Industry Documents and decided to take a look. One of the documents was an internal memo from the 1950s by an executive in one of the tobacco companies, saying they had discovered that passive smoking caused lung cancer and needed to suppress the findings because if they got out, it would lead to legislation about smoking in public places, which would ultimately affect sales. The memo outlined what they should do to suppress the information, including hiring scientists to lie and say that smoking is safe. This ended up happening. It is called the White Coat Project, and to this day, Many people continue to believe that the evidence that smoking causes lung cancer has been falsified. Story 50. What Carla Homolka and her husband Paul Bernardo did, and the fact that she is free today is shocking. She is married to her lawyer's brother, with whom she has 3 children. Among the many crimes they committed, they drugged and raped 15-year-old Tammy, Carla's little sister, in the family home on Christmas Eve. Because of the drugs they secretly gave young Tammy, she choked on her own vomit and died. They also tortured and raped 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French before gruesomely murdering both. I am a peace-loving person who cannot even kill a mouse, but I would execute them both without a qualm because of what they did. They recorded their crimes and got excited watching the tapes together. Story 51. Someone already mentioned Junko Furuta, but a runner-up for spooky is the Setagaya family murders. The fact that the murderer stayed in their home for a while afterward and left urine in the toilet terrified me when I first read it. Story 52. After reading many of these comments, the answer is simple. Humans are the scariest story, and that is completely true. Although there is much good in the world, humans are also the most frightening and vile of all living beings. Story 53. American Primeval is a historical drama based on the 1857 Mountain Meadow Massacre during the Utah War. A sinister massacre occurred near St. George. The perpetrators used psychological warfare and mass hysteria to ambush the Baker Fancher Party. Mormon teachings promoted moral panics and the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. A memorial plaque reads, "Here 120 men, women, and children were massacred in cold blood early in September 1857. They were from Arkansas. Utah's history is chilling to me as a resident of Utah." Story 54. More sad and disturbing, but it is scary to think someone would do this. I live in Southern California, about 30 minutes away. I cannot remember the exact year or how long ago, but it was within the last 30 to 50 years. A female bus driver for children picked up all the kids, drove to the train tracks, and purposely got hit by a train. Everyone died. Story 55. The murder of Oki Al-Kite genuinely terrifies me. The idea that he was seemingly picked at random and that the murderer simply vanished is chilling. The fact that the killer planned everything carefully and the way he tortured that poor man is horrifying. The perpetrator feels like a real-life boogeyman and gives me the creeps. There are very good write-ups on the true crime subreddits, but keep in mind that the content is disturbing. Story 56. The only viable planet capable of supporting all forms of life is being sacrificed to generate money and wealth. Story 57. The incalculable amount of damage done to both the Earth and humanity by Thomas Midgley Jr. creating tetraethyl lead, all in the name of profit. Story 58. Bhopal, India. Gas leak accident in Bhopal, India on December 3, 1984. On December 3, 1984, over 500,000 people near the Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh, India were exposed to the highly toxic gas methyl isocyanate. This event is considered the world's worst industrial disaster. A government affidavit in 2006 stated that the leak caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severely and permanently disabling injuries. Story 59. I recently learned about Woodstock 1999, and some of the stories from that festival make my skin crawl. The event was very understaffed and unprepared for the weekend and the mayhem that occurred. There were people wielding knives and attacking others in mosh pits, along with multiple deaths and sexual assaults throughout the weekend. One story that really stuck with me was about a girl crowd surfing who was grabbed and held down by several people while bands were performing. Multiple individuals took turns assaulting her, and no one in the crowd intervened. There are many horrible stories from that weekend. 39 people were arrested, but only one was charged with sexual assault. Story 60. This happened just next to my hometown. For context, I live in Pedro Juan Caballero, a city in Paraguay next to Brazil. It is plagued with drug trafficking and everything that comes with it. One day, a plane carrying millions of dollars in cash crashed near an indigenous village. The natives took the money, but the owner found out where the plane had fallen and sent his henchmen to retrieve it. They tortured and killed the entire village to recover the money, which they did. This is one of many disturbing stories from here. Story 61. Working late at my office in downtown Chicago, I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. I found a man hiding behind the stairwell door with a knife. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. The police caught him 2 days later. He had been attacking women in the building for weeks. Story 62. That time scientists said that they did not know what would happen when they turned the Large Hadron Collider at the European Organization for Nuclear Research on, then turned it on, and now we are all living in some alternate reality version of idiocracy in the Twilight Zone. Story 63. I worked my whole life in government. Politicians are truly corrupt, and we might as well get used to it because we are not going to change it. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is absolutely true. Vote for the lesser of two evils and move on. Do not be disappointed when they do not deliver because half the things they promised are not even feasible. I would see local politicians promise things that I knew they could not financially deliver. There was no way. The public still buys into it because they do not know any better. For example, the president does not have much control over gasoline prices. Get that out of your head. Story 64. The murder of Anita Cobby. As a woman myself, my heart breaks for her. It has been 40 years, and I still cry for her. Rest in peace, Anita. Story 65. A mentally ill man stabbed his entire family and then himself to death this month, on the day of his son's graduation. Story 66. The silent twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons. June and Jennifer were identical twins born in 1963 in Wales. From early childhood, they were inseparable but also completely isolated from everyone else. They developed their own secret language, refused to speak to family, teachers, or therapists, and mirrored each other's every move perfectly. As they grew older, their bond became toxic. They believed one had to die for the other to truly live. They began committing petty crimes such as arson and vandalism and were eventually institutionalized at Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, for 11 years. Then, out of nowhere, Jennifer whispered to June, "I'm going to die. It's time." And she did. Jennifer died mysteriously of sudden inflammation of the heart in 1993. No drugs, no poison, no clear medical cause. Just gone. June later said they had agreed that one of them had to die to free the other. After Jennifer's death, June began speaking and reintegrated into society as if nothing had ever happened. Story 67. An 8-year-old was found murdered on a rural road near where I live. As far as I know, they never found the perpetrator, and the event has been shunned to the point that only the older generations are aware it happened. Story 68. The Holodomor. In much of the world, it seems unheard of, but it is how Ukraine learned the lengths that Russia would go to exterminate them in order to steal their land. It happened nearly 100 years ago, and Russia still thinks they are entitled to that land. I only came across the story by accident since I am a prolific reader, and I had to look it up. I couldn't understand how you could try to starve an entire country's population and it wouldn't come up in history class, having been overshadowed by the Holocaust. Was there even a footnote somewhere I missed? Story 69. The story of the priest John Geoghegan in Boston. He abused young boys, and when the parents tried to stop it, they were threatened with removal from the church and the jobs that these people relied on. When it got bad enough and nobody would allow their children around him, the church simply moved him to another parish to start all over again. This continued for more than 20 years. That is terrible enough. When they finally charged him and brought this to light, the Catholic Church fought it in court with all they had, almost as if this was normal and the priest had only gone a little too far. Where I grew up Catholic as an altar boy and so on, nothing like this happened because we did not depend on the church, so there were no easy victims. Story 70. My aunt and her 2 children, my cousins, were murdered in a small town in Wisconsin. Our entire family knows who did it, but he has walked free this entire time. I think we are at the 25-year mark, maybe give or take a year. One of my cousins was just shy of her 13th birthday, and the other was in college. The fact that the murderer has never suffered any consequence from this is beyond frustrating and honestly kind of embarrassing when looking at the American judicial system. I am fully convinced that he is an actual psychopath and absolutely loves that he pulled it off. Story 71. Scary as in how to get away with murder in Perth, Western Australia. In the early hours of August 27, 1925, Mr. Cyril Gidley, an engineer on the MS Kangaroo, was enjoying the revelry of one of the highlights of the Perth social scene, the annual St. John of God Ball. The ball was held in the Government House ballroom. Miss Audrey Jacob, Mr. Gidley's ex-fiancée, was likewise enjoying the grand social occasion in the company of her friend, Miss Annie Humphreys. During the evening, Audrey noticed Cyril in the company of another young lady. Audrey stepped away from the ball and returned with a loaded revolver. At approximately 1:30 a.m., she approached Cyril, pointed the revolver, and shot him in the chest at point-blank range. Standing no more than 6 feet away and still clutching the revolver in her right hand, Audrey allegedly confessed, "I did it," and requested that the attending police officer take her away. The trial was held on October 8, 1925, before Justice Northmore. Audrey, who appeared calm and self-possessed at this time, pleaded not guilty to the charge of willful murder. It was almost 9 p.m. on October 9th when the 12-man jury returned with their verdict. By this time, Audrey Jacob was a pitiful figure, pale and trembling, seeming on the verge of collapse. All held their breath as the jury foreman made the announcement. Not guilty. Audrey was found not guilty of Cyril's murder, despite the crime being plain to see on the dance floor and her utterance of "I did it" to a police constable on duty that night. In an inquest that gripped Perth, Cyril was characterized as vicious and deserving of his fate, while Audrey was the wronged person and the victim. But now, thanks to recent reinvestigation by academics and historians, we know that media spin, a cunning defense lawyer, and unwritten law played an unfair role in Audrey's acquittal. According to Caroline Ingram, a PhD candidate in history at the University of Western Australia, unwritten law was basically a popular understanding that respectable women who had been seduced and abandoned or jilted by their fiancé or lover had the right to take their revenge. Story 72. I have met a number of people who worked with Agent Orange during the Vietnam War, and even their great-grandchildren have kidney problems. Meanwhile, the same companies that produced Agent Orange manufacture the pesticides used on almost all of our crops and have been slowly poisoning us. Story 73. I am late, but my uncle was severely schizophrenic, and he ended up putting his 2 young children in an industrial oven at his place of employment to cleanse them. This was in the 1980s, and he is still in prison because of it. Story 74. The godfather of artificial intelligence, Geoffrey Hinton, is so convinced of the danger of artificial intelligence in the next few years that he thinks there is about a 50% chance of it leading to our extinction. He is actively putting his affairs in order. Story 75. The Great Leap Forward. The details are highly suppressed, but it is the greatest man-made disaster in world history. 45 million Chinese died from 1958 to 1962, a period of 4 years. Story 76. Not a widespread story or famous, but a call I ran as an emergency medical technician on a pediatric intensive care unit transport. Some details have been changed for confidentiality purposes. A 15-year-old, perfectly healthy, athletic girl came home from school one day, and her parents noticed she was more tired than usual, a little out of it, and weak or off balance. They thought she might be getting sick but took her to the emergency room because something did not feel right. I arrived with my intensive care unit team about 4 hours later. She was in cardiac arrest for the 6th time, being bagged by hand to breathe since she would not breathe on her own well enough and was not tolerating mechanical ventilation. She went into cardiac arrest another 3 times while we tried to stabilize her. She received numerous blood transfusions, plasma, epinephrine, and fluids as we tried to keep her heart beating. She developed a double hemopneumothorax in one lung, and the emergency room doctor inserted a chest tube in the trauma bay to drain it. She was still responsive to pain enough that she tried to push the doctor away when the doctor made the incision between her ribs. There was much more, but about 6 hours later, we got her to the children's hospital. 2 days later, I saw one of the staff from that team and asked if there was any information about her condition, prognosis, or cause. My management and stress management team had also reached out to the hospital requesting an update on my behalf for my mental health after the call and received the same information. They told me the repeated full cardiac arrests had caused her to form blood clots, which at that point had resulted in the amputation of 2 limbs. She had been declared brain dead, and her parents were planning to withdraw life support. Scans revealed a ruptured arteriovenous malformation. There was literally nothing we could have done to save her given the location and severity of the rupture. It was remarkable that she survived as long as she did. That call still haunts me more than 5 years later. I still think about her. The possibility that anyone out there has an arteriovenous malformation they do not know about, which could rupture at any moment, is frightening. You would never know until it was too late. Story 77. The way a family friend died. We'll call him C. C was outside a nightclub having a smoke when he was attacked from behind. He was killed by his attacker who bludgeoned him so hard with a lead pipe, he decapitated him. C's girlfriend was the first to find his body outside. Police caught the attacker, who claimed C had been sleeping with his wife, who had left him and taken the kids. But he strangely could not remember their names when questioned further. They raided his house and found he was living like a homeless person, with only a mattress on the floor. The man was schizophrenic. There was no wife or kids. He had an episode where he created a completely different life for himself, spotted C while walking around during this episode, and decided C was the other man. C died just because of a story a man made up in his head. This is why I'm always on my guard around strangers. You have no idea how many people are out there who are just walking bombs waiting to go off. Story 78. Ergot poisoning in medieval Germany was terrifying. It is a fungus that causes intense and often fatal hallucinations. Entire towns experienced demonic hallucinations and mass deaths with no explanation. Some striking artwork from this period depicts what people saw. It possibly caused another phenomenon called the dancing plague. People began spontaneously dancing in a wild and ecstatic manner. More and more people joined in until it spread to large crowds. The dancers would continue until they collapsed from exhaustion and often died. Story 79. Nazino Island is a tragic story, and how the victims arrived there, many being children taken from the streets, is haunting. They became animalistic and violent in most cases, especially the men who had been arrested for actual crimes. The story of the woman who was eaten alive yet remained conscious and spoke to her boyfriend will never leave my mind. Then, of course, there are the stories of Junko Furuta and Sylvia Likens. Story 80. Not the scariest, but the one that kept me awake for a while. How easily Grenfell was allowed to happen. Some people will tell you Britain is health and safety mad, but 72 people died because of repeated and severe illegal actions or failures to act throughout that building, not just the cladding. In a safe building, the close your doors and stay where you are instructions of the fire brigade would have been correct. Story 81. There are several answers. The Tunguska event is unsettling but not terrifying. It is real and remains unsolved. The Black Death killed about 50% of Britain. It has not been eradicated. A student at a nearby high school died from it. Prion disease. Story 82. Just 15 minutes away from me in Matawan, New Jersey, is where the real story behind the movie Jaws actually happened. Story 83. There is a person on Reddit who does not understand how percentages work. Scary, but completely true. Story 84. The impunity of Mohammed bin Salman and the complicity of the administration in supporting Saudi Arabia after they executed Jamal Khashoggi. Story 85. I cleaned at a restaurant and I was the only person there. In the men's room, there was always a presence, but it was good. In the kitchen, I sometimes saw a waiter, but there was no person there. In the cleaning kitchen was the entrance to the freezer. Every time I cleaned there, the temperature of the freezer would go up. If I left, it would come down. There was also a bar in the cellar with a small wine cellar where there was some sort of jail. It was always super cold. One day, I yelled, "All right, I am going to take a picture. Show yourself." In the back left corner was a black figure in front of rows of glasses. Between us, you could see 4 white clouds swirl as if to protect me. I felt so eerie I quit that job. I have never been there since. Story 86. There was a man who disappeared from my town and was found years later living under a false name in a neighboring town. Story 87. Many years ago, I was a wilderness guide in the Rocky Mountains in the Peace Reach region of northern British Columbia, Canada, working at a very remote lodge. The nearest town was a 3-hour drive, much of it on unpaved logging roads. Once, a great horned owl dragged a bloody hair across my windshield while I was driving back up to the lodge. Cool moment. We offered helicopter hiking on surrounding peaks for wealthier guests who could fly in. It was one of only 2 places in the world where you could cross the continental divide by water. There was a 10,000-year-old aspen forest and rugged, remote country. Towards the end of summer, I had a stretch of bad luck where I almost died 3 times in 3 days. Started snowing soon after, and I promptly quit and flew out. The place had all the makings of a Shining-style winter, and I was not having any of it. This story is about the second near miss. On the rare days when no guests were booked, I would head into the backcountry. I did not like people much, and I certainly did not care for the lodge owners or staff at that point. My feelings were clearly reciprocated. I was bouldering, free climbing solo with a light pack and some camera gear. I was pulling myself up onto the top of a peak I had wanted to check out, as I had seen a body of water on it while flying over a few times, which meant there was a good chance to get some nice wildlife pictures. Counting cliffs, slopes, and other sudden drops, there was about a 500-foot drop below me. It was a hot day. The climbs were hard but straightforward, broken up into stages, and offering a new mountaintop view. No other climbers were present. A good day. I was a bit tired, probably slightly heat-stroked and dehydrated, and excited to finally be up there. I was not as focused as I should have been at the moment. I popped up over the top of the ridgeline and something big was there, maybe 10 or 15 feet in front of me. Neither of us expected the other. It jumped, moving a whole lot of forest with it. I jumped too backwards. Life got real exciting for several seconds. In due time, I was gratefully lying face down and exhausted, but back on top of the ridgeline again. I was pleased to note that, despite my best efforts, I had neither fallen off a mountain nor been eaten. 2 major life goals achieved. Whatever it was had loudly and indignantly moved down a game trail, while I was vigorously debating with gravity and friction. From the noise and what I caught of the size, I figured it was either a grizzly bear or a moose. Neither option was great, but I was too tired to descend the way I came, and my new friend was now ahead of me if I walked down using the game trail. Suboptimal. Story 88. You and everyone you know can die at any given moment for almost any reason. Aneurysm, crushed by a falling tree, hit by a car, blood clot, carbon monoxide poisoning, heart attack, and more. Story 89. A couple in their 50s and their son, age 26, were drinking moonshine together. They had been drinking for 2 days. The son suddenly decided to use a match to set a rolled-up newspaper on fire. He then used the newspaper to light his mother's dress on fire. As she tried to put herself out, the husband yelled, "Let her die, she's no good anyhow." They finally helped put her out by throwing a bucket of water on her. They then left her on the floor of the house for 3 days before finally getting her help. Her body, from her shoulders to her ankles, had been burned. When she was first admitted to the hospital, they did not think she would live. Both were arrested, but it does not appear that either served time. This occurred in 1931. The only positive aspect of the story is that the woman lived another 15 years. The husband apparently died the following year, but no exact month or date of death has been found. There is also no available death certificate, obituary, or cause of death. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.